I want to move Jack Coons. Jack Coons, I want you to come in now. I know you're in principle advocating the voucher system. Could you give us the case as you see it? I know you've got your differences with Milton on it, but let's have the case.
What we are doing in California is establishing a form of change, possible change, proposing a change, in which lower income people will get information along with the opportunity to go to any school of their choice and transportation to get there. Of course they need information. Anybody needs information in a market, and they need information from independent sources, not from the schools themselves, and that's the way the initiative is designed, to come from independent sources. Now, we believe that ordinary people can make the best judgments for their children about where they should go if they're given good professional advice. And it also helps teachers because they can, for the first time, be professionals. They can act like real professionals because they don't have a captive audience. They don't dominate their client, they respect their client, and they deal with them on the basis of contract. What could be better for teachers than for the first time to become people who are dealing in a democratic and respectful way with clientele instead of with captives?
I am concerned that voucher systems will lead towards havens for white flight, will lead towards a dual school system in the sense that you have one school system operating under one set of rules, the other school system, the public school system, operating under carefully articulated educational policy in any given state.
In fact,
and that's why I think
in Los Angeles County, the movement to private schools last year was less, a smaller percentage than in the statewide pattern.
You may have 5 or 10% of the students who have very severe problems and come from families with very severe problems, and those students take up 95% of the time of the teachers and the administrators, and the other children aren't getting an education. Now, you're going to set up your voucher school. Are your voucher schools going to accept these tough children?
You bet they are.
Well, they accept these.
And those kids,
if they accept those children, I'll tell you what's going to happen.
Okay, you tell me and then I'll tell you.
What's going to happen is that the parents of all the other children are going to move right out and go to another school, because ultimately you're going to have to deal with hardcore problems.
John Coons.
Whether it's in a private school or whether it's in a public school.
In other words, that kid isn't tough in the school that he's in because he's stuck there. He's just a rotten, tough kid.
He may be a kid with a lot of problems, not rotten.
You can't imagine a situation where if he were given choice and allowed to go to a school that he liked and to which he would connect emotionally, that he would no longer be a troublemaker, but that he would like to stay in a place where he has chosen and would therefore do what is necessary to stay there and to learn.
You know, I don't think you've been near schools or classrooms for a heck of a long time.
I happen to have 5 kids who've done a lot of time in public and private schools both.
We're not talking about the problems that your children have.
Let's go around the table.
I have to get to this point because I think it's a very crucial one. I don't think Mr. Schenker is saying that you should never use a doctor if you have cancer who hasn't himself had cancer. But let's get rid of the idea that the only people who are competent to judge about whether a school is good or bad is a parent who at the moment has children in that school. The plain fact is that children are not born troublemakers. They do not emerge from the womb. Some of them do, of course, but most of them do not. Most of the cases of the tough kids in the schools you're talking about are tough kids because they're lousy schools, because the schools do not evoke their interest, because the school does not attack.
You're dead wrong. You're
Give
dead
them choice.
Now, wait a minute. Now, I want Greg Andring on this one. Milton,
it's not often I have a chance to tell a professor he's wrong, but with all respect, Professor, the problems that you see in the urban schools of this country are not problems of the schools. They're problems of poverty. And they're problems of what do you do when, for demographic and sociological and economic reasons in a country like ours, you begin to concentrate those people who are poor in the inner and older parts of the cities of our country. That's when the problem comes. And it's not just a problem of schools. It's a problem of housing, of jobs, of medical care, of social services, and the same problems crop up. And to say that the answer to that is take one part of that element and say just set up a competitive marketplace is not dealing with the problem. The problem is the problem of poverty.
We've dealt with the problem.
I am struck with the anomaly that arises out of any of this discussion of the voucher system. The facts are that government support, call it subventions, call it direct aid, call it grants and aid, call it vouchers, call it anything, will lead ultimately to government control of the private schools, thus undercutting the alternative nature of private schooling and hurting it at its very source.
Well, then you ought to look at our initiative.
With that in the, on the higher education level, you had the whole GI Bill. Did the GI Bill really lead fundamentally to control of all the schools? There's a fundamental difference between government giving money to an institution, to a school. That does lead to control directly. And government giving money to people to use. The food stamps don't determine what people buy with their food stamps. They may be a good or a bad program. That's not my point. My point is that don't underestimate the crucial difference between making money available to parents to spend as they choose to exercise their judgment and making money available to institutions like schools, which they spend subject to all the conflicts which they have with school teachers and others.
You use Dartmouth as an example, and I think the concerns that I have about the voucher systems, the various ones proposed, is not with the one applicant that can get accepted to Dartmouth, but with the 8 applicants that don't get accepted to Dartmouth. What's going to happen to that group of youngsters? You can have a situation in the free marketplace where everybody takes the cream. But what about the youngster that doesn't measure up? What about the youngster that's a risk? It seems to me that some of the greatest leaders of this country were people that would have been rejected by Dartmouth and most of the Ivy League schools.
Let's get other views on this, then we'll come back to you.
I just want to comment, because I have to comment on 2 points, the one he made earlier about poverty and this one. But on this one, Dartmouth is one of the best examples of the private schools. UCLA is one of the best examples of the state schools. That's why we chose them. There are many other private schools which are not as selective and are available to people who can't make the Dartmouth cut. There are many other public schools, state schools, that are less advanced than UCLA and the California system. There are all sorts of grades of schools. But the difference between the two is the same at lower levels. Now, I do want to make one comment going back to your poverty thing, and that is that, first of all, other programs in this series deal with the issues you've raised. But second, do not underestimate the role which bad schooling provided by our present governmental mechanism has played in creating poverty. It's been a major source, particularly among black and white teenagers coming up to the slums. It's been a major source of their difficulties of getting out of the trap of poverty. So it's not a one-way relation between poverty and the schools. The schools have themselves bear a great deal of responsibility.
The reason the schools bear it, and it isn't the schools directly, it's that we don't put enough resources in for children who need special and additional help because they are not getting it in their homes, or they're not getting the same sort of support in home and community as middle-class kids do. And then we wait until the child is 16 or 17 and drops out, and then we provide a youth employment program for them where we spend between $5,000 and $10,000 to try to undo what could have been undone in the first, second, and third grade if we had a decent investment in the public schools.
I have never yet known